Part 3, County Limerick, March 1847. For the first time in months, Breda found herself planning for tomorrow. Not because she believed the famine was ending, far from it, but because tomorrow no longer seemed impossible. She measured the oats carefully into a small wooden bowl, not too much, not too little. Every handful might mean another day. Every wasted grain could mean hunger later. The rice she stored in a crock near the fireplace, carefully covered with cloth to keep out dampness. She checked the sacks twice each evening, not because she feared they would disappear, because she still couldn't quite believe they were real. The children were changing, only slightly. Their cheeks were still hollow, their clothes still hung loosely from their small bodies, but there was colour returning to their faces. Breed laughed more often. Seamus no longer lay awake, coughing through the night. Even their voices sounded stronger. Breda noticed these little things before anyone else. A mother always did. One afternoon, Seamus emerged from outside, carrying a broken branch almost as tall as he was. "Ma'am, what have you found?" "It'll burn." Breda smiled. "It will." Together they broke it into smaller pieces. Breda gathered fallen twigs while humming to herself. By evening, a proper fire burned in the grate. Not because there was turf, only wood gathered from hedgerows. It burned too quickly, it smoked far too much, but it was warm. The children stretched their hand toward the flames. "I've forgotten what warm fingers feel like," Breda whispered. Breda turned quietly away. She didn't want them to see her crying. Across the parish, things grew steadily worse. Every day another family disappeared. Some entered the workhouse, some left for America, some simply vanished. Their cottages stood empty, doors swinging in the wind. Father O'Donovan buried 3 parishioners that week. On Sunday, there were noticeably fewer people at Mass. The priest spoke gently. We must not let hardship steal our compassion. His eyes moved slowly around the congregation. When little remains to share, he said, share kindness. Breda lowered her head. She wondered whether somewhere in the chapel sat the person who had left the food. If so, they gave no sign. That night, the moon was full. The lane leading to the cottage shone silver beneath its light. A hooded figure approached, carrying another canvas sack. This time the stranger paused halfway across the field. There was movement near the cottage. A figure crouched behind a hawthorn hedge. A fox. It trotted quietly across the lane before disappearing into the darkness. Only then did the stranger continue. The sack rested gently against the door, not dropped, placed, as though even the smallest sound might wake the family. Before leaving, the hooded figure looked toward the tiny window. Inside, Breda sat sewing by candlelight while the children slept. The stranger remained there for several moments, watching, then quietly melted back into the shadows. The next morning, Breda found another parcel. This one contained oats, rice, a loaf of brown bread still soft enough to press with her fingers, and something wrapped carefully in linen. She unfolded it slowly. Butter. Real butter. Only a small piece, but enough. She closed her eyes. "I don't understand," she whispered. Word had spread beyond the parish now. People began arriving simply to ask about the mystery. One elderly woman crossed nearly 5 miles. "I heard someone was feeding a widow." Breda nodded. "So they are." "Who?" "I wish I knew." The woman laughed softly. "If you ever find out—" "I will. Tell them there are a dozen more widows they might visit." Neither woman smiled after that. The truth hurt too much. That afternoon, Breda walked to the little stream behind the cottage to wash clothes. Breda splashed happily at the water's edge. Seamus sat skipping stones. "You missed, ah?" Breda looked at her son. "I do." "And so do I." He threw another stone. It bounced 4 times. "I've been trying to remember his voice." Breda's heart tightened. "And it's getting harder." She sat beside him. "Close your eyes." He did. "What do you hear?" "The water, the birds, the wind." She smiled. "Your father laughed like this stream." Seamus opened one eye. "What do you mean?" "He laughed often." She smiled at the memory, and loudly. The boy grinned. "I think I remember. I hope you always will." Late that night, Father O'Donovan stopped by unexpectedly. "I was passing." Breda smiled knowingly. "No, Father." "You came to see whether we'd enough to eat." The priest chuckled. "Perhaps." She showed him the newest parcel. He examined it carefully. "The bread is fresh from today, and the butter." He nodded thoughtfully. "This isn't random." What do you mean? Whoever is helping you, he said quietly, knows food. They know exactly what your children need. Breda looked at the sack again. I've wondered that. They never leave too much, no, enough to keep you alive. Exactly. The priest rested his hand upon the table. This tells me something. What? That it isn't charity born of guilt. Breda frowned. No. He smiled gently. No, it's care. That night, after the priest had gone, little Brede climbed onto her mother's lap. Ma'am? Yes, darling? When God sends people to help... Breda brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. Yes? Do they know they're helping God? Breda smiled. I don't know. Brede considered that carefully. I hope they do. So do I. The following morning, as the sun rose over the fields of County Limerick, a young rider crossed the estate at an easy pace. He couldn't have been more than 15. His horse slowed as they approached the river. The rider stopped. For a long while he simply looked at the water flowing quietly between its grassy banks. Finally he removed his cap. His gaze settled on one particular bend in the river, a place where less than a year earlier a frightened little boy had disappeared beneath the current, and a brave man named Seamus Keane had leapt in without hesitation. The young rider bowed his head. Then, with a gentle touch of the reins, he rode on toward the big house. The river still did not know his name, but the river remembered, and so did he. Part 4, County Limerick, late March 1847. Spring arrived quietly. The hedgerows began to show the first hints of green. Blackbirds returned to the fields. The river flowed as faithfully as it ever had, untouched by famine or sorrow. Only the people seemed unable to believe that winter had ended. Breda stood outside the cottage with a wooden bucket in her hands. The morning air was softer now. Not warm, but no longer biting. Seamus was scratching shallow furrows into the tiny patch of earth behind the cottage. What are you doing? She asked. I'm getting it ready. For what? The potatoes. Breda smiled sadly. The blight may come again. He looked up. It might not. She wanted to tell him not to hope too much. Instead, she nodded. It might not. Sometimes children possess the courage adults had misplaced. The food parcels continued to arrive, not every week, sometimes after 5 days, sometimes after 10. Never on the same day, never at the same hour. Always before dawn and always without a note. Always enough. Never excessive. The mystery itself had become part of Breda's life. She found herself listening for footsteps in the night, watching the lane whenever she passed the window. Looking twice before opening the door each morning. Hope had become a habit. One evening, rain fell heavily until well after midnight. By dawn, every path had become thick with mud. Breda opened the door, expecting another ordinary morning. Instead, she stopped. There was no food parcel, only footprints. Fresh, perfectly preserved in the soft earth. She knelt beside them, one set. Not large, certainly not the boots of a grown labourer. The stride was long enough for a youth, perhaps no more than 15 or 16. She followed them with her eyes. They led from the lane to her doorstep and then back toward the road. Halfway across the lane they disappeared, where the ground became stony. She stood slowly. So, she whispered, you are young. Seamus came outside. What are you looking at? The footprints. He crouched beside them. They're smaller than yours. They are. They're too big for mine. Breda laughed softly. Yes. He studied them carefully. Do you think it's a boy? I don't know. Or a girl? I don't know that either. Brede joined them, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I think it's a giant fairy. Seamus rolled his eyes. There aren't giant fairies. There aren't. There are too. Breda smiled as they argued. For a few moments, the famine seemed very far away. That afternoon she mentioned the footprints to Father O'Donovan. The old priest leaned thoughtfully against the churchyard wall. Young, you say? I think so. He rubbed his chin. That narrows it considerably. You know who it is? He smiled. No, but I know who it isn't. Who? Nearly every man in the parish. She laughed. I suppose that's true. The priest's smile faded. Young people often carry burdens older people have forgotten how to bear. Breda looked puzzled. What do you mean? Only that compassion sometimes comes from unexpected places. Several miles away in the stable yard of the estate house, a young groom tightened a girth on a handsome bay horse. The landlord's son entered carrying a small leather satchel. Riding out again, Master Edward? The boy nodded. I'd like to see the lower fields. The groom smiled. They're looking better than last year. I hope so. As he mounted, the groom noticed something unusual. The satchel seemed oddly heavy. Taking books? The young rider glanced down. Oh. He smiled politely. A few things. The groom thought no more about it. Young gentlemen often carry strange belongings. Edward guided the horse slowly toward the river. He always chose that route. Whenever he reached the bend where he had nearly drowned, he paused, not because he wished to remember, because he believed he should. His father rarely spoke of that day now. Edward thought about it almost every day. He remembered icy water filling his mouth. He remembered panic. He remembered disappearing beneath the surface. Most clearly, he remembered a pair of strong hands lifting him toward the light. He had lived. Another man had died months later. Sometimes gratitude felt painfully heavy. That evening, hidden beneath his bed at the big house, lay 2 empty canvas sacks. Edward carefully folded them. Beside them rested a small notebook. Inside were neat columns: oats, rice, tea, butter. He studied the page for several moments, then wrote one more line. Children look stronger. He closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and stared into the darkness. I haven't forgotten, he whispered. It was impossible to know whether he was speaking to himself or to the memory of Seamus Keane. The next morning there was another parcel waiting outside the cottage. Breda laughed aloud. So you fooled me. She had watched the footprints. She had searched the lane. She had almost convinced herself deliveries had ended. Instead, the mysterious visitor had simply come a night later. Inside the sack she found oats, rice, a small loaf, and something carefully wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it. Seeds, cabbage, turnip, onion. She stared at them in astonishment. Not merely food, a future. She looked toward the empty lane, then toward the fields beyond. Somewhere, someone believed she would still be alive when those seeds were ready to harvest. For the first time since Seamus had died, Breda allowed herself to imagine that perhaps they would be.